All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome back to those that were on our end user training this morning. Anyone that was not on that training, welcome. My name is Kathleen Barr. We're going to be doing our super user training, which is a training for supervisors, basically anyone that is going to be responsible for either managing time for another user or maybe approving their time card. This training is going to be for you. I will try and pause throughout the training for questions, but if you guys have any as we're going through, feel free to go ahead and ask them. I'll be happy to answer them. So just to make sure everyone can see my screen, I did get multiple messages. If there's anyone that is still working on getting the screen connectivity, just let me know. If not, I will go ahead and jump in. So what I am displaying currently is a PowerPoint of what a supervisor is going to see when they are going to enroll a employee's biometrics at the time clock. So I mentioned this briefly in the end user training, but before your employees can actually start to use the time clocks with their biometrics, we have to enroll their fingerprint. To do that, what you would do is as a supervisor, you would go ahead and either if you have a physical badge or your badge number, type that information into the clock. And you're going to see the main login screen of the time clock. So this is going to be very similar to what the employee had, except we have one other feature at the very bottom, and that is to enroll employees' biometrics. So we'd go ahead and click on that button. And then from here, it's pretty straightforward. We have the option to either enroll or verify. So if an employee is brand new to the time clock, you've never tried to enroll their fingerprint, we're going to hit that top button and go ahead and enroll them. Now, if your employees have any kind of issues with getting a fingerprint read, I would advise trying a different finger. Usually the index finger or middle finger, those fingers tend to enroll the easiest. But if you're still having issues, feel free to reach out to me. I do have some guides that might make it a little bit easier for enrolling. Verify would be used if an employee has already been enrolled and you just want to verify that their fingerprint is present in the clock. So typically we would just be using the enroll button, and once you click that, the employee is going to put their fingerprint on the biometric reader, and it's going to give you this message. It's going to say place finger on scanner. As soon as the finger is present, it's going to say scanning, and then it's going to let you know when it's complete and the employee can remove their finger. We typically advise that you try and enroll an employee's or a couple of different fingers for the employee just to be safe, just so they have a couple of different fingerprints in there that they can use. And once the scan is complete, you will get a message that will display, and it'll let you know what the quality of the fingerprint is. Typically, we want to shoot for an 8 out of 10 or higher quality reading. If you get anything lower than that, I would probably recommend that you go ahead and try and enroll again with that same finger. And if you're still not getting anything 8 or higher, maybe try a different finger for that employee. So it's pretty straightforward with enrolling. After you do get a successful enrollment, the employee can go ahead and start clocking in and out with their biometric fingerprints. Any questions about the physical time clock from a supervisor perspective before we jump into the system?
No.
All right. So let's go ahead and look at it at ExecuTime from a supervisor perspective. So I'm logging in as my test supervisor, Sandra Supervisor. I already have her credentials typed in, so I'll go ahead and hit the sign in button. And the main screen that you as a supervisor are going to see when you log into the system more than likely is going to be the timesheet entry page. Under Employee Actions, this is where you can modify your own time card. Now, you might have a different security and permission role, which will log you in immediately to a different screen, and that's totally fine. But this is what I saw most supervisors are assigned to. Since we, though, went over all of Employee Actions, I'm just going to skip that tab, and we're going to go straight into Supervisor Actions. So within Supervisor Actions, we have a multitude of pages available to us. The first page is our dashboard. So this is where, as a supervisor, I can get quick information on my employees to see maybe if I have any kind of pending time off requests or time cards that need my attention. So you'll see we have a few tiles here. We have the information tile, which just displays messages for today. We have current statistics. So this would be if we had any time cards that needed to be approved or time off requests that needed to be approved. Now, you might notice next to current statistics, it says filtered employee results. So I'm going to show you in just a moment what the ExecuTime filters are going to do for us. But at the bottom here, we also have the who is here status. So it'll show what the availability status is for whoever I have selected. So right now we're just viewing our own status. So Sandra is showing as a status of unknown, which means she has not recorded her time in the system. So her status is just currently at unknown. If she were to record a clock in transaction, her status would then change. So let's talk about what these filters are and what we can do with them. So at the top left of your screen, if you are set up as a supervisor, you'll have these filters set up. When you first log into the system, you're going to have one filter created by default. And it's going to be for your first and last name. What that means is that throughout the system, if I have this filter selected and turned on with this check mark, I'm only going to see my information. So this is helpful if I'm under the Employee Actions tab. Maybe I'm working on my own time card as an employee, and I don't want to mix up any of my direct reports while I'm working on my own time card. But as a supervisor, I do need to see others' time cards as well, especially when I'm under Supervisor Actions. So I'm going to show you guys how we can create filters which are going to dictate who we're going to see on the different screens of ExecuTime as we're navigating through. So to create a new filter, I'll hit the pencil icon next to that drop down. And within the setup of these filters, I have different attributes that I can create them from. So a couple of popular filters I might recommend to you guys as super users. You could create a filter based off of different departments. Now, if you are a supervisor who only has one department assigned to them, creating a filter based off of that department is probably not going to be much help, just because you don't have multiple departments to kind of select from. So this is more so if you have multiple departments that are available to you. What you could do is select multiple departments by holding down your control key. So let's say I want to select these 3 departments. With these selected, I can come up to the top and hit the Apply Filter Now button. And then at the very bottom, it's going to show us which employees match the criteria above. So it looks like we have 10 employees within those 3 departments. If I'm happy with this filter I've created, I can come to the top and under Filter Name, just type in a name for that filter. So I'll keep it simple and just call it Department Filter, and I'll hit Save. Now you'll see that within that filter dropdown, I have the department filter available to me. So throughout ExecuTime, I could navigate and only view employees within those 3 departments. It's important to note that these filters are unique to my own login. So if I create a department filter, no one else in the organization is going to see this filter. So any filters you create are just for you individually. They are totally optional as a supervisor. If you have a high number of employees that you have access to and you really need to narrow them down by specific groupings, these filters will really come in handy. Like I mentioned before, though, if you are someone that only has maybe one department assigned to them, you might not really rely on these filters too much. But feel free to play around with them and see if they are going to be something that's helpful for you. I want to show you another way to create a filter. Let's say that you wanted to create a filter based off of a last name, and you wanted anyone whose last name started with a T, a U, or maybe a V. I could put the letters with commas in between, hit Apply Filter Now. Let's surprising that we don't have anyone with the last name T, U, or V. Let's try A, B, C, or D. Oh, I'm sorry. If you guys are running into issues with these filters, just make sure you deselect your previous selection. So let's try that again. So I'm looking for the last name T, U, or V. I'll hit apply filter now, and that looks a little more accurate. So we have 22 employees that have the last name with one of those letters. I could then come up to the top like I did before, name my filter, and save. So now we have these selections available to us. We have the default filter, which is just for my individual information. We have that department filter created and the last name filter. You might notice I have a custom filter I accidentally created here. If you ever need to delete a filter, just come up to the saved filter selection box, select the filter you want to delete, and then just hit that little delete icon right next to it. So now that we've created the filters, let's go ahead and put them to use. I'm going to move on to employee time summary. So employee time summary is where you as a super user can come in and view different employees' information as far as have their time cards been approved, how many hours do they have for a given pay period, generally helpful information like that. As you'll notice, I only have Sandra's information on the screen so far, and again, that's because my Sandra supervisor filter is selected and enabled. There's a couple different ways we can view other employees on here. We can select from the filters that we created. So let's say we want to see everyone in that department filter. Selecting that, I now have 9 employee records on the screen. If I choose my last name filter, I have 7 records on the screen. Now there's another option. Like I said, filters are optional. So if you are someone that only has one department assigned to them, what I might recommend to you is that you just disable your filter at the top. And it is going to then give you access to all the employees that you have been set up with access to. So I have access to 199 records in the system just because I'm a test supervisor. But everyone on the call, your access is going to vary depending on your role. Some of you might only have access to 10 employees. Some of you might have access to 80. It really depends on how your setup was configured. So it's important to note that you're only going to be able to create filters based off of the employees that you've originally been given access to. So when you guys first get logged into the system, again, feel free to play around with those filters, or if the filters aren't really going to be for you, you can just disable your filter and open it up to viewing any employee you have access to. Any questions on those filters?
Can you filter by account number?
Let's take a look. I know you can filter by job costing code, so we'll go back in there. And on the right here, we have time card filter attributes for account number and budget unit. So yes, you can absolutely select different account numbers and create a filter for that. Great question. Any other questions on filters?
No.
All right, guys. Moving back into employee time summary. So just to kind of give you a rundown of what's present on this screen. The first column here is going to show any kind of time card violations. So ideally, we want to see a green check mark, which tells us the employee doesn't have any violations for that given pay period. If we saw a red exclamation point, that is going to tell us the employee does have a violation. So anyone that was on the end user training earlier this morning, we saw that Joe Salaried had a red exclamation on his time card, letting him know that he was missing a out transaction. So if any of your employees maybe clocked in for the day but forgot to clock out, you will be able to see a quick little notification under the employee time summary page, which is nice. Then we have the columns for time card approval. So if the employee is missing their approval on their time card, we'll see an icon letting us know that, as well as for the level 2 and level 3 approval. Now, like I mentioned in the end user training, some departments are only going to require maybe a level 2 approval or maybe a level 3 approval, and some departments are going to require both. So that'll be something that will depend on your individual department. The access that you have specifically as a supervisor or super user, we'll be able to see when we go down to the time approvals page in just a few.
Can people other than the level 2 or level 3 supervisors who have to authorize the time card, can you add additional people in between to give them the opportunity to review?
Yes, so maybe let's say you as a super user, you're out and you need someone else to kind of fill in and review your time cards for you. That could be an example. If you have level 3 access, you also have level 2 access. So there are multiple users, I believe, in the system who are, especially those on your finance or your payroll team, who are going to have the level 3 access as well as access to all employees. So there should always be someone that could be more in a secondary position that could approve time cards for you as if needed. Great questions. But looking at these columns, as you can see on the right, we also have a breakdown of hours for each employee. So as a super user, I can come through, see if any of my employees have overtime, see if they're kind of low on their regular hours. I'm just going to kind of get a feel for their time card and also dive into their time card if needed. Let's go ahead, though, and move into the Manage Time Off screen. So Manage Time Off is where, as a super user, I can come in and either approve, reset back to a pending status, or decline a time off request. So we saw in our end user training where Joe Salaried was able to make a time off request. After that time off request is made, this is the screen where his supervisor would need to come in and actually either approve or decline the request. So as you can see, we have a few different requests out here, and I'm only going to see time off requests for those employees that I have been given access to. So let's try and find Joe's request. This is the request that he made for this coming Thursday. There's a couple different ways I can address this time off request. I can hit the check mark next to the request, and then I could come down to the bottom and either approve or decline it just from this screen. I could even select multiple requests and approve them in bulk. Another way to look at the request, though, is to hit the edit icon right next to it. And from here, as a super user, I could actually change the pay code. Let's say Joe chose the wrong pay code. He let me know about it. I could go ahead and make that change for him. I could change the number of hours that he's requesting, and I could even add my own comment as a supervisor. Once I make my selections, I could either go ahead and approve or decline directly from this screen. Another scenario, so I mentioned in the end user training, if an employee's request has been approved or declined and they need to make a change or maybe delete it out, it will require that as a super user, you reset it back to a pending status. So all you would want to do is check off the request that needs to be reset. And then at the bottom, you can just hit reset back to pending. And then at that point, the employee can go back in and edit or delete as needed. If you are missing some requests and you cannot find them, you've made sure your filter is turned off, you know that your employee made a request and you're just not seeing it on this screen. A couple things I'd recommend you take note of. First, we have the pending only checkbox. So this is selected, so I'm only going to see pending requests. But if I turn that off, it's going to open it up and show any requests that have either been declined or approved. We then have pay periods. So if I wanted to narrow it down to only view biweekly or biweekly part-time requests, I could do that here. I typically just leave this at all. Then time frame. So time frame is going to typically default to about a month and a half of requests that it's going to show you. But let's say my employee requested off around Christmas. I would want to modify the to date to encompass the rest of the year and go ahead and hit apply. The last thing I want to show you guys here in manage time off is this calendar. So in the end user training, we saw a employee benefit calendar that was really helpful, and that's where your employees can just view their own time off requests and things like that. Now, as a super user, I might need to see all of my employees' requests. You can do that by clicking into the calendar. Okay. So the calendar is going to take us into this monthly view, but you can view the calendar by week or day. And it's going to show you all of the employees that you have access to and any time off requests that they've made, and whether they've been approved, declined, or pending, they will show on here. So first, I like to show you that Monday looks pretty crazy. Now, this is not showing us time off requests necessarily that employees have made. If I hover over them, it says this is for holiday pay. So since 9/2 had a holiday code on it, it's going to show all of our employees. Now, if you don't want to view all these requests, what you can do is filter the pay code. And let's say you only wanted to view maybe your annual leave request. You could click that, and it's only going to show you those request types. Or let's say we want to filter a status. So we don't want to see approved or declined. We only want to see pending requests. And now it's going to show us any employee that we have access to that has a pending time off request. These requests are color-coded like we saw in the end user training. So the yellow-orange is going to be for a pending request, green is going to be for approved, and gray is for decline. Now, one thing in here that you can't actually do as an employee, which is pretty neat, is let's say we look at one of our employees' requests. We can double click that request and it's going to pop up with a little box. And we can either approve, decline, reset, or edit directly from this calendar, which is pretty neat. So this is a pretty popular screen for super users. It's pretty neat what it can do. And again, that was under your Manage Time Off page with the calendar button on the top right. So we'll go now to Manage Hours Request. And like I mentioned in the previous training, Manage Hours Requests is going to work the same way as a time off request. The only difference is going to be the type of pay code that is requested. So time off requests are more so for benefit type codes, and hours requests are typically for non-benefit type codes. So as you can see, we have a couple of different requests from our employees. They both requested off for jury duty. So jury duty, since it's not considered a benefit, that's why it is separately requested in the hours request screen. But approving, declining, resetting, that is all going to work the exact same way in here as a supervisor. So again, the only difference is going to be the codes used. Moving on to employee time maintenance. So employee time maintenance is more than likely where you guys are going to spend the majority of your time as a super user. If you are responsible for resolving any kind of missing punches or adding time onto an employee's time card, this is where all of those edits are going to actually take place. So we have the ability to edit or add time for both the current period as well as the previous period. We then have a drop down of employees' names at the center of the screen. Again, this is only going to give us names for those that we have been given access to. And if you are unable to see certain employees, just make sure your filter is disabled at the top left. But let's say we want to look at Joe Hourly's time card. We can just type in his last name here and hit enter. And now we can see his transactions for this period. From this screen, we can do a few different things. As you can see under the Actions column, we can edit his transaction. If I hit that pencil, it's going to pop up with this screen where I can change the in date and time, the out date and time. I can change his position for him. I can change his account number or budget unit number. I can even add a comment. So there's a lot that I can do as a super user to my employee's time card. If I made any changes, I could just hit save. And it's going to update the time card automatically for me here. This second little action icon here, if I hover over it, says split this entry. So let's say that your employee worked, let me modify this punch real quick. As you can see, he clocked in and out within 3 minutes, so it's showing his time logged as 0. Let me modify this so we can actually get some hours on his time card. I'm just going to change this to 5 o'clock. Okay, so now that top transaction is showing 8.75 hours. Let's say that the employee worked under 2 different account numbers or 2 different budget units, and we needed to split that time. What you could do is use the split this entry button, and it's going to pop up with the job costing split box here. So it's going to first show us that we have 8.75 hours that we can work with. To start a new split, you would hit the plus sign. And there's a few different options to split the time. We can split the time with a duration or a percentage. So if we know that we want to split time, we want 3 hours to be under one specific account number or one specific budget unit, I can type in 3. When I select outside of that box, it's automatically going to change the percentage for me. And it's going to work the exact opposite way as well. If I just manipulate the percentage, it's going to automatically change the duration for me. So it'll work either way you want to do it. Then under account number and budget unit, I can go ahead and make the appropriate selections. Now, I don't know a specific account number or budget unit combination for you guys, so I'm just going to choose some random codes here. But you will have to hit this Load All Available Entries button. When you do, you'll have the drop-down available to choose whatever code you need to. So again, I'm just going to choose just 2 random codes just to get some information on the time card for us. If I'm happy with these selections, I'll hit save. And then it's going to apply immediately to our time card. So you might notice I don't see the split for the time I just created. That's because there's an option to either show or hide the job costing splits. We have this option because sometimes if you especially rely heavily on job costing, the time card can look a little bit busy. So if you want to view the splits that you created, just check off that box. And now you're going to see that we put 3 hours into that specific budget unit, the rest of the time is just going to be blank because it was not recorded under a specific budget unit. So I know this is really going to vary depending on what department you're in, but I just wanted to show you how you can split the time, and there's a lot of flexibility with what you can do with those codes. The last action icon to show you guys is to delete the entry. So if you wanted to completely delete out a transaction, you can just hit the delete icon here. And then you have these 2 buttons at the bottom under Employee Time Maintenance. You have a button to add a new time entry or add a new clock in and out entry. So the difference is going to be adding a new time entry is where you want to add a just blank number of hours. Maybe it's 8 hours, maybe it's 6.5, maybe it's 7 hours. Whereas adding a new clock in and out entry is going to be used when you have an employee who has specific punch in and out times. So maybe they came in at 9:05, they clocked out for lunch at 12:33, and you want to record that time for them at the specific times. That is the option you would choose. Now, typically you would need to do this if your employee forgot to record their time. Other than that, their punches should show on their own time card. But as a super user, you do have the options to fill in that information if it is missing. So let's go ahead and start by clicking in Add New Time Entry. I'll show you what that looks like. So this is pretty straightforward. If you're adding a new time entry for your employee, you would just choose the pay code. You would choose the date that you want to add the time entry for. As we've seen before, there will be a default start time of 8 a.m., but you can change this as needed. End date, you can leave blank unless you are recording time for multiple days. You could put the number of hours or the duration you want to put on the time card. So again, that could be 8, it could be 7, it could be 10.5, whatever it might need to be. You could change the employee's position from their default. You could choose specific account number and budget unit, and you could also add a comment. You could say employee forgot to record their time this day. I'm going ahead and adding the time for them. Whatever you need to put on their time card, you could add that and just hit save. So again, that was add new time entry if you need to add a duration of hours. Let's look at the example of adding a new clock in and out entry. So this option looks very similar, except at the top we have the in date and time, as well as the out date and time. So again, this is more so for employees that have specific clock in and out transactions. You would go ahead and add that here. Now, if an employee missed just one clock in or out transaction, I would not recommend you use this method for adding the time. This option is for an employee that completely missed both their clock in and out transaction. But if an employee just missed an out transaction, what I would do instead, if I go back, we would see the transaction on the time card, and we'd even see that red exclamation point that we saw in our end user training saying there's a missing transaction here. It needs to be resolved. What we would probably see is that the employee had their in transaction, but for out, it's blank. So what you would want to do in that case is just edit the transaction and plug in that missing out time. Any questions on employee time maintenance? I know this is going to take some practice and getting used to, but any questions right now you guys can think of? Alrighty.
I sent a question via chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. Brian? Does the end user have the ability to request time off directly from the time clock? Yes, they do. Let me just quickly go back to that screen. This is what it's going to look like for an employee who's requesting time off at a time clock. They'll choose the pay code, the date, and the amount or the number of hours they want to request, and just hit submit at the bottom. Oops. Thank you for that question, Brian. And I do see some messages from Dee. So Dee, you were messaging me about the account number. Is that regarding security access for those job costing codes?
It was somebody had a question earlier about seeing the account number.
Yes.
So I was mentioning they can only see the account number in that section if that was their default that was assigned to the employee for the part-timers that have multiple jobs.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning that. So what that means, guys, is when we were looking at your filters, if you are filtering by an account number or budget unit, you should only see the codes that your employee has access to. So you more than likely will not see this full listing of account numbers and budget unit numbers. I just have access as the test supervisor. So again, it's just one of those things where where y'all will have to get into the system and play around and see what you can see and make sure that your access is correct. So thank you,
Well,
Dee.
actually, the person asked if they could do the filter by account number. So since employees only are entered their default job, if an employee, like part-timers, have multiple jobs, the supervisor won't be able to do a filter by an account number for their secondary and their third or their fourth jobs. They'll only be able to do it by the default job associated with the employee.
Now, when you say job, I'm thinking you're talking about these codes here, these position codes.
Well, remember we added account numbers. Each employee has their default account number associated with them.
Right.
But it doesn't have, if they have multiple jobs, somebody won't be able to do the filter by the other ones, only the default.
Okay.
I believe the person that asked the question was somebody that was a supervisor over part-timers.
Okay.
That have multiple job listings.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just have to kind of look at it. For the person that asked the question, as soon as you do get into the system, if you can just confirm you're only seeing the codes that you need access to, and just share that with your finance team, and y'all just let me know if there's any issues with that, but it should work the way you guys need it to. I see another question from Dana. When splitting hours, can you split regular and overtime hours? So you can split time into regular and overtime. However, there's a couple things I want to mention with that. Overtime is being calculated automatically by the system. So 9 times out of 10, I would say that you do not have to manually put hours into overtime, unless it's a specific scenario that calls for that. But depending on the employee you have and their threshold of overtime hours in a week, the system should automatically convert time into overtime for them. Now, if you needed to split a transaction into multiple pay codes, you would not actually use this split this entry icon. That icon is just for job costing codes, so your budget units, your account numbers. If you needed to split a transaction into multiple pay codes, what I would do is hit the edit icon, and then however much time you wanted to split, just change the in and out times to account for however much time you want to add to regular, save, and then go back in, add a new time entry, and choose whatever secondary code you want to encompass the remaining hours in. I hope that answered your question. Okay, awesome.
I just have one more question.
Absolutely.
So for the example of Jim's salary, where we saw that he forgot to punch out in 2 instances, and we noticed that clarification, the exclamation, and then Jim's salary goes back in, and then he checks it off. In the instance where that is not, where Jim's salary does not go back in, but a level 2 or a level 3 goes back in and then accepts the punch out time, does that supersede all the need for anyone below that level to go back in and accept that change?
So let's take a look at that. That's a great example. So
the scenario would be the example where our end user does not, let's say, is out for an extended period of time, and maybe even the supervisor. So then if the level 3 just went in and did it, would that address that, or would at every check someone have to go back in and then check that as approved? Every gate per se.
So a level 3 should be able to resolve the missing transaction issue. That shouldn't be an issue, but I think we're talking now about time approvals. So let's kind of just walk through it as an example, and we'll see how it's going to work for us. I'm just going to quickly, I'm under employee actions, and I'm just going to do a quick, actually he's still already clocked in. Let's look at Joe's time card and see if that error is still showing on his time card. Okay, it is. Perfect. So like we saw earlier, Joe salaried, clocked in. He hasn't clocked out yet. Let's say he left for the day, completely forgot to clock out. I'm his supervisor. I need to resolve this punch for him. But in your example, I think you were saying the supervisor might be out. So could a level 3 go ahead and resolve that for him? And what would the time card approvals look like? Is that kind of what your scenario was?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess I was just trying to understand the need for at what level would all the checks need to be checked. I guess.
Okay.
Like let's say we have a level 3 that's also doing timesheets as a level 2.
Mm-hmm. So anyone that has access to the employee can resolve the punch issue. When it comes to time approvals, if you are a level 2 approver, you will need to put your stamp of approval on the time card. But let's say you're out and your department has a level 3. The level 3 can approve both at the level 2 on your behalf as well as the level 3. Now, again, some departments are going to require both levels. Some are only going to require one, I believe. If a level is missing, let's say a department only requires one supervisor or department approval, it is not going to affect the employee from being paid.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
And I think when we go down to time approvals in just a moment, it'll make even more sense. But I want to show you guys how we could resolve Joe salaried his violation on his time card. I know I had verbally explained how you could resolve this missing punch, but just to kind of show you, what you would do is hit this edit icon. And his end date and time were already populated because he chose he used the clock in button. So all we'd have to do is choose whatever his out time for the day was. Let's say he left early for the day. He left at 12:30. I could go ahead and enter that out time. Missed out punch. I can type that in for the comment and I can hit save. So now Joe's time card no longer has that violation present, and it has both his in and out transactions on the time card for him. And in a moment, we'll take a look at what his time card approval is going to look like. We'll move on to who is here. So who is here is where, as a super user, I can look at all the employees I have access to and see what their availability status is. So are they clocked in? Are they clocked out? Are they on time off? Things like that. So you'll see the majority of our users currently are set to unknown. Let me just open this up to viewing all of our employees. So again, employees who have not recorded a clock in or out transaction are going to show as unknown. But if we scroll down to Joe Hourly, he's actually showing clocked out because he has recorded his clock out transaction for the day. And his status is also going to show in red. So these are color coded. If you have employees that are clocked in, they're going to show green, out is red, and then I believe yellow is for those on time off. So that's what the who is here is for. It's just a quick way to look at your employee statuses. Moving on to transaction audit. This is where you can get an audit of employees' punches. You can see when a punch was added, when it was edited, who added the punch, what was their method for adding the time. Was it at the time clock? Was it at a desktop computer? All that information is going to display here. So this is a really helpful tool. And you can view this audit individually by each employee. I'm going to skip geodata audit just because we currently do not have geodata in use. But what that does is if geofencing was set up, meaning we have restrictions on where users could actually access ExecuTime. If someone had clocked in, we could see where they clocked in from. If that is set up then this information would be filled out. So I'll skip over that for now, and we'll go to approval audit. So approval audit is very similar to transaction audit, except it's going to show us any time card approvals. So let's look at Joe's salaried for the previous period. So since Joe approved his time card twice, it's going to show us each time he did an approval. So first on 9/12, he did his approval. And then on 9/23 today, he did a secondary approval, and it's going to show us that he just actually updated his time card. So as soon as Sandra's supervisor or anyone applies a second or third level approval on the time card, that's going to show up here in the approval audit. And now we have the long-awaited time approval page. Time approvals is going to look very similar to that employee time maintenance page because we can actually edit, delete, perform job costing splits, as well as add a new time entry or clock in and out entry directly from this screen. But we can also apply our supervisor approval on the time card. So the first thing we would want to do is make sure that we have the correct employee selected. We would then want to make sure we have the correct pay period selected. So again, it's going to default to current, but right now I want to do an approval for the previous period. We can review our employees' hours to make sure everything looks accurate. And then we have this message that says, in order to approve the time card, we need to clear out the show job costing splits box below. So again, we have the ability to show or hide job costing splits. So before I approve, I just need to deselect this box. Now that that's deselected, I have the boxes to approve and apply my initials. So this is where we'll have to see who is set up as level 2 and who is set up as level 3. So I would say most supervisors are going to be set up as a level 2, and then if you are perhaps a department head or something higher, you might have department or level 3. Again, it really is going to depend on the department. Sandra's supervisor only has level 2 access, so she can approve at the level 2 level. If she had level 3 access, she could apply at both level 3 and level 2 if the level 2 was perhaps out and needed me to fill in for them. So let's say I've reviewed the time card, it's ready to go. I want to stamp my initials on there. I can type my initials in. I can either hit approve, and what approve is going to do is leave me on this time card as soon as it approves the time card. Or let's say I'm going through a list of 30 employees and I'm trying to kind of make it as efficient as possible. If I hit approve and next, it'll approve Joe's time card and then take me directly to the next employee on the list. So for now, I'm just going to do an approve just on his time card. And now you'll see under the level 2 approval, we have my initials. And then next to each transaction, we have my initials present as well. If I were to make an edit to any of these entries after my approval, it's going to strip my initials away from that transaction, as well as Joe's initials. So if edits are made after approval, it might require that you have both the employee and level 2 or level 3 approve again. And then just to note it one more time, if let's say a level 2 or level 3 approval is missing, it should not affect the employee from actually being paid for that period. Any questions on time approvals? Okay, guys.
No.
Awesome. The next area and the last area I want to show you guys is our reporting section. So as a super user, you should have access to all of ExecuTime's reports. As you can see, we have a decent amount of reports available to you in these. There are some really great reports in here. Each report is going to have a parameter box that you'll fill out to run the report. Some popular reports I might recommend to you guys are the time card and time summary report. So let's say we just want to run our time card report right now. I'm just going to run it as an example for us. Some fields are going to be marked with a red asterisk and are required, and others are not required. So I will need to choose the pay period group I want to run this for. Let's say I want to run it for all my biweekly folks. Pay period range. I can choose whichever pay period I want to run the time card report for. So let's say I wanted to run it for the previous period. Organizational unit type. So more than likely, unless you have access to multiple departments, I would probably recommend that you run the report just for all of your active employees. And if I select that unit type, it's then going to give me all of the employees that I have access to. So I will hold down my shift key and just select all of my employees. Locations you can leave blank. And then you can come down to the bottom and choose an employee type. Let's say you only wanted to view hourly folks or just your salaried or salaried employees who are clocking in and out. We could narrow it down here. We could choose to include terminated employees. So let's say I wanted to view a time card for employees that are no longer active. I could include them in this report, but for now I will just leave that off. And then I can include or not include rounding. So since your employees' punches are going to be rounded, I'm going to leave that turned on. If I hit the OK button, it'll just process for a moment. And the report is going to show on the screen. So as you can see, the report that I ran has 200 pages. And then you have these icons on the top left. The first icon is where you can toggle between different employees to see where their time cards are in the report. Oops, I'm sorry about that, guys. I did not mean to hit that button. Let me just run it one more time. Okay, so that was that first icon where you can toggle between different employees. The next option is to run the report again. So if I hit run report, it'll pop up with the parameter box and it'll have all my selections that I already made selected. So that's kind of nice. If you actually went back and hit time card report again, it's going to wipe out all your selections. So this is a way to quickly run that report one more time. Then we have two options for exporting. You'll notice the first option says export data, while the second option says export report. So not super detailed as far as what each option is going to do for you, but this is what I would recommend. The first option is what I would choose. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. I would choose this first option if you were wanting to run a report and export as a CSV or Excel. What you would do is just choose the report that you just ran. So it's my time card report. I can pick and choose the columns that I want to export and bring them over to selected columns, or I can just bring over all of the available columns. As you can see, the export format is going to be CSV. So I can leave all the other information as is and hit OK. And then it's going to save my time card report, and I can go ahead and just open that in Excel. So again, I would recommend the export data report if you need to have a CSV file. If you're looking more for maybe a PDF, I would choose the second option where it says export report. And you'll see that we have export format and it's going to default to PDF. I would leave it as is, leave all the other selections as is, and just hit OK. And once it downloads, it should be present on the bottom left of my screen. And then I can open up the report in a PDF. The last option is to print. So you can print these reports directly from your desktop, which is really nice. One more thing I like to recommend is that if you are running reports and you want to know which reports are going to do what, utilize that help document I showed you guys in the end user training. You can go down to the reporting section and it's going to give you explanations for each and every report so that you can figure out which reports are going to help you the best. But these reports really are great, a really helpful tool. So that was all I had for you guys today for our super user training. Just want to open up the floor for any other questions that anyone might have.
No questions, I guess.
All right. Well, very good. We made it just in time then. We just have a couple minutes to spare. I will get this recording as well as the end user recording out to you guys, and you can share that internally. If any questions come up throughout the rest of the day, feel free to reach out to me. I really appreciate everyone's time.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
So what's your time frame for roll-up?